Young Seamstress raised twin orphans in silence until the Duke returned, claiming them as his heirs. The autumn rain fell relentlessly over Greywick Lane, casting a silver sheen upon the cobblestones as evening descended. Within the modest attic workshop, illuminated only by a pair of guttering candles, Marian Larkwood's nimble fingers guided the needle through fine cambric. The twins, Sylvan and Layla, slumbered peacefully in the small alcove adjacent to her work table, their copper bracelets catching occasional glimmers of candlelight. A sharp knock at the door below startled her, causing the thimble to slip from her finger. Visitors rarely called upon a humble seamstress after dusk, particularly on such a tempestuous evening. Marian glanced anxiously toward the children before setting aside her work, smoothing her simple sage-colored gown, and descending the narrow staircase. "Who calls at this hour?" she inquired, voice steady despite her trepidation. "A message from Eldermoor Castle, Miss Larkwood," came the reply, muffled by the rain and solid oak. Marian's heart faltered momentarily as she unlatched the door. A liveried footman stood before her, water cascading from his hat, an envelope of heavy cream parchment extended toward her. Upon its seal, the crest of Veriton gleamed darkly in the lamplight, a stag beneath twin stars. "His Grace requires your services at the castle tomorrow morn," the footman announced with practiced formality. "The Duke has returned to Eldermoor and requires alterations to his ceremonial attire for the welcoming assembly." Whispers of the Duke's return had filtered through Greywick for weeks, though Marian had paid them little heed. 7 years had passed since his departure following the tragic death of his Duchess and the mysterious disappearance of their infant heirs. 7 years since Marian had discovered 2 abandoned babes upon her doorstep, each bearing a curious copper bracelet. "I shall attend His Grace," Marian replied, accepting the summons with a curtsy so subtle it barely disturbed the air. The footman nodded curtly before turning back into the deluge, leaving Marian to close the door upon the night once more. Her fingers trembled as they traced the waxen seal. The Duke of Eldermoor had returned, the man whose name she dared not speak aloud, whose shadow had unknowingly fallen across her modest existence for 7 years. She ascended the stairs slowly, the parchment heavy in her hand. The children slept on undisturbed, unaware of the thread of fate that had begun to draw tight around them all. Sylvan's dark curls fell across his forehead in a manner so reminiscent of nobility that Marian felt her breath catch. Beside him, Layla's delicate features appeared almost ethereal in the flickering light, the copper bracelet gleaming dully against her wrist. "What shall become of us?" Marian whispered to the silence. Morning arrived swiftly, grey and misty. Marian dressed the children with particular care, Sylvan in his finest woolen coat with brass buttons, Layla in a dress of dove-grey muslin with a ribbon matching her eyes. "Must we accompany you, Mother?" Sylvan inquired, fidgeting beneath her attentions. "I have no one with whom to leave you," Marian explained gently, adjusting his collar. "You shall sit quietly while I attend to His Grace's requirements." The journey to Eldermoor was undertaken in sombre silence, the hired hackney carriage rattling along the winding road that separated Greywick from the ancestral seat of the Veriton family. The castle loomed before them eventually, its ancient towers piercing the mist like sentinels. "It resembles a painting from my storybook," Layla whispered, pressing her small face against the carriage window. Marian said nothing, her gaze fixed upon the approaching gates with an intensity that betrayed her disquiet. The carriage passed beneath the stone arch, hooves echoing against ancient cobbles, before coming to rest in the courtyard. A steward awaited them, his expression impassive as he regarded the modest seamstress and the 2 children who clung to her skirts. "Miss Larkwood," he acknowledged, with the barest inclination of his head. "His Grace awaits in the east chamber. The children must remain below." "They shall accompany me," Marian replied, her tone quiet but unyielding. "They are well behaved, and shall not disturb His Grace." The steward's nostrils flared slightly in disapproval, but he made no further objection as he led them through vaulted corridors, adorned with ancestral portraits. Marian held tightly to the children's hands, her heart thundering within her breast. Each step carried them closer to the man whose blood ran in the veins of the children she had raised as her own. "I present Miss Larkwood, the seamstress," the steward announced, as they entered a chamber awash with morning light from tall, mullioned windows. And there he stood, the Duke of Eldermoor, Caelan Veriton, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the grey sky beyond the glass. He turned slowly, and Marian felt the world still around her. 7 years had etched new lines of sorrow upon his noble countenance, yet his eyes remained the same striking blue-grey she remembered from broadsheets and public proclamations, eyes that now widened as they fell upon the children at her side. The chamber fell silent, save for the ticking of a mantel clock and the soft patter of rain against ancient stone. Your Grace. Marin curtsied deeply, lowering her gaze as propriety demanded, though she felt his stare like a physical weight upon her shoulders. The Duke remained motionless, his eyes fixed not upon the seamstress, but upon the children who stood sentinel at her sides. His complexion had paled visibly, rendering the thin scar above his left brow stark against his skin. "I was informed you required alterations to your ceremonial attire," Marin ventured, when the silence stretched beyond comfort. "Indeed," he replied at last, his voice deeper than she had anticipated, rich with the cadence of one accustomed to command. "Though I confess myself distracted." He advanced a step, his gaze never leaving the twins. "These are your children, Miss Larkwood. They are in my care, Your Grace." "Their names?" Marin hesitated, her fingers tightening imperceptibly around the children's hands. "Sylvan and Layla, Your Grace." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Curious names. Of your choosing. They seemed fitting." The Duke's attention shifted to her face then, his gaze penetrating. "Indeed, the ceremonial coat requires slight adjustment to accommodate changes in my form over these 7 years. I trust you can manage such alterations." "Certainly, Your Grace." He nodded toward a garment draped across a nearby chaise, a coat of midnight blue velvet, adorned with silver embroidery at the cuffs and collar. "I shall require it by tomorrow evening for the assembly." Marin released the children's hands, instructing them with a gentle murmur to sit upon a bench near the window as she approached the coat. Her practiced eye assessed the garment, noting where adjustments would be required. She was keenly aware of the Duke's continued scrutiny, though whether it fell upon her or the children, she dared not turn to discover. "If Your Grace would permit me to take measurements." He nodded curtly, stepping forward and extending his arms as she retrieved her measuring tape from her work bag. Marin moved with professional efficiency, though each point of contact, the circumference of his wrist, the breadth of his shoulders, sent a current of awareness through her fingertips. "The children," he said abruptly as she measured the length of his sleeve, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "They bear unusual bracelets." Marin's hand faltered momentarily. "A trinket, Your Grace, nothing of consequence." "Is that so?" Before she could respond, Layla had abandoned her position on the bench and approached, her natural curiosity overcoming the solemnity of the occasion. She gazed up at the Duke with wide grey eyes so similar to his own that Marin felt a tremor of dread. "Are you truly a Duke?" the child inquired, her voice clear as a bell in the hushed chamber. "Layla," Marin admonished softly, "return to your seat at once." "Let her remain," the Duke commanded, his tone gentler than before. He knelt upon one knee, bringing himself to the child's level. "I am indeed Miss Layla, though it is merely a title bestowed by circumstance of birth, not merit." "Mother says merit matters more than birth," Layla replied earnestly. "Does she indeed?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, as his gaze flickered to Marin before returning to the child. "Your mother sounds most wise." "She is not truly our mother," Sylvan announced, having approached silently to stand beside his sister. "She found us as babes and kept us safe." The chamber stilled, the admission hanging in the air like smoke. Marin closed her eyes briefly, a prayer for deliverance forming wordlessly in her heart. "Found you?" the Duke echoed, his voice carefully neutral despite the intensity of his gaze. "Upon her doorstep," Sylvan continued, oblivious to the tempest gathering in the room. "In the rain, with naught but blankets and these bracelets to our names." The Duke extended his hand toward Layla's wrist with deliberate slowness. "May I?" The child nodded, allowing him to examine the copper bracelet that encircled her slender wrist. His fingers traced the engraved symbols with a reverence that bordered on anguish. "And you, young sir?" he asked, turning to Sylvan. "Do you bear the same mark?" Sylvan displayed his own bracelet without hesitation, the copper gleaming dully in the grey morning light. The Duke rose to his full height, his expression inscrutable as he turned to Marin. "Miss Larkwood, I believe we have matters of grave import to discuss." A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted them, and the steward reappeared with a bow. "Your Grace, Lord Holden Veriton has arrived and requests an immediate audience regarding matters of succession." "How timely," the Duke remarked, a note of irony colouring his words. "Very well, show him to the library. I shall attend momentarily." He turned back to Marin, his voice lowering. "You and the children will remain here until my return. This conversation is not concluded." "Your Grace," Marin began, her composure threatening to fracture, "I must return to my work in the village." "The alterations can be completed." "You will remain," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument despite its quietude. "This is not a request, Miss Larkwood." With that, he departed, the door closing firmly behind him. Marin sank onto the chaise, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Have we displeased you, mother?" Layla inquired, her small brow furrowed with concern. Marin gathered both children to her, pressing her lips to their heads in turn. "No, my darlings. You have done nothing wrong." She drew a shuddering breath. "But I fear we stand upon the precipice of great change." Beyond the chamber windows, rain began to fall in earnest once more, sheets of silver cascading from a leaden sky. Marin paced the perimeter of the room, each tick of the mantel clock a reminder of their confinement. The children had grown restless, though they maintained the decorum she had instilled in them from their earliest years. "Why does he keep us waiting?" Sylvan asked, his inherent dignity betrayed only by the impatient tap of his foot against the polished floorboards. "A duke attends to many matters of importance," Marin replied, striving for a calm she did not feel. "We must be patient." In truth, she contemplated escape with every circuit of the room. The windows were too high, the corridors surely monitored. Moreover, flight would only confirm suspicions she had long feared would materialize. The copper bracelets had haunted her dreams for 7 years, their mysterious engravings a constant reminder that the children were not truly hers to keep. The door opened without warning, revealing not the Duke, but a stern-faced woman in the severe black dress of a housekeeper, her hair pulled into a tight chignon beneath a starched cap. "I am Mrs. Reddenfall, housekeeper of Eldermore," she announced, her gaze sweeping critically over Marin and the twins. "His Grace has instructed that you are to be shown to guest quarters while he attends to pressing business." "Guest quarters?" Marin echoed, alarm rising within her breast. "That will not be necessary. We must return to Greywick." "His Grace insists," Mrs. Reddenfall replied, her tone indicating that the matter was settled. "The children will be provided with refreshments while you and I discuss certain matters." Marin felt the blood drain from her face, though she maintained her composure for the children's sake. "Very well," she acquiesced, seeing no immediate alternative. She knelt before the twins, adjusting Sylvan's collar and smoothing Layla's ribbon with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. "Go with Mrs. Reddenfall for some tea. I shall join you shortly." "Must we, Mother?" Layla whispered, clinging to Marin's sleeve. "It will be but a moment," Marin assured her, though doubt gnawed at her heart. She watched as the housekeeper led the children from the chamber, Sylvan glancing back with an expression that reflected her own unease. Once alone, Marin returned to the Duke's ceremonial coat, running her fingers over the fine velvet as if the familiar task might anchor her in the storm that threatened to engulf them all. She had nearly completed an assessment of the necessary alterations when the door opened once more. Admitting the Duke himself, he entered silently, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Gone was the controlled equanimity of their earlier encounter. In its place burned a fierce intensity that caused Marin to retreat a step. "The bracelets," he began without preamble, advancing toward her with measured strides. "Where did you acquire them?" "As the children said, Your Grace. They wore them when I found—" "Do not prevaricate, Miss Larkwood," he interrupted, his voice low but forceful. "Those bracelets were commissioned by my late wife for our children who vanished the very night Eldermore was breached, and the Duchess lost her life." Marin blanched. "I had no knowledge of this, I swear it. The children were abandoned at my door 7 years past, during the great storm that ravaged these lands. I took them in, cared for them as my own. You never thought to inquire about their origins, to seek their rightful family." "I made inquiries," she countered, lifting her chin despite the fear that threatened to consume her. "None claimed them. The parish had orphans enough without 2 more mouths to feed." "Would you have preferred I left them to the mercy of the workhouse?" The Duke's expression shifted, a shadow of remorse passing over his features. He turned from her to pace before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Why did you not come forward when news of the missing heirs was proclaimed throughout the county? By the time word reached Greywick, the children were already established in my care," Marin replied softly. "They had survived illness and hardship. They called me mother. How could I surrender them to a distant nobleman who might view them merely as political pawns?" He whirled to face her, indignation flashing in his eyes. "You presumed much about a man you never met, madam." "I presumed nothing but what experience has taught all women of my station, Your Grace," she replied, unable to temper the note of bitterness that crept into her voice. The nobility rarely concern themselves with the hearts of common folk, or even their own children in many cases. A charged silence fell between them, broken only by the persistent patter of rain against the window panes and the soft crackle of the fire. The Duke studied her with an intensity that caused heat to rise unbidden to her cheeks. "You have raised them well," he said at last, his tone softer. "They bear themselves with dignity beyond their years." "They are remarkable children," Marin agreed cautiously. Yes, the Duke murmured, more to himself than to her. That much is evident. He straightened his shoulders, assuming once more the mantle of authority. I have instructed that you and the children remain at Eldermoor until this matter is resolved. Accommodations have been prepared, and if I refuse, then you force me to involve the magistrate, he replied without hesitation, though his expression suggested the option gave him no pleasure. I have lost 7 years with my children, Miss Larkwood. I shall not lose another day. Marin felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. You believe them to be your heirs, based solely upon the bracelets? The bracelets are but one piece of evidence. Their age, their bearing, the circumstances of their abandonment, all align with the events of that night. He approached her slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. And then there are their features. Sylvan has the Veritan brow, the same as every duke before him. Laella's eyes are the precise shade of her mother's. Marin closed her eyes against a sudden rush of tears. She had always known this day might come, had prepared herself for it in theory, but the reality crushed her heart nonetheless. What becomes of us now? She whispered. The Duke's voice, when he replied, held an unexpected gentleness. That, Miss Larkwood, remains to be determined. Night descended upon Eldermoor, shadows creeping across ancient stone as servants moved silently through the corridors, lighting lamps against the gathering darkness. Marin sat beside the hearth in the guest chamber assigned to her, needle flashing by lamplight as she worked upon the Duke's ceremonial coat. The familiar rhythm of stitching soothed her troubled mind, though her eyes frequently strayed to the adjoining chamber where the twins slumbered. They had accepted their temporary residence at the castle with the resilience of youth, entranced by the grandeur that surrounded them. A pang of guilt pierced Marin's heart as she recalled Layla's delight at the four-poster bed, a luxury beyond anything the child had known in their modest attic rooms above the village seamstress shop. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. She set aside her work, smoothing the folds of her dress before responding. Enter. The door opened to reveal not a servant as she had expected, but the Duke himself. He had discarded his formal attire for a simpler coat of dark green wool, though his bearing remained no less regal for it. Your Grace, Marin acknowledged, rising and offering a curtsy. I did not expect you at this hour. Forgive the intrusion, he replied, his gaze sweeping the chamber before settling upon her. I find sleep elusive tonight. As do I, she admitted. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle crackle of the fire. The Duke's gaze fell upon the ceremonial coat draped across her lap. You work late. The alterations must be completed by tomorrow, as you requested. Marin hesitated before adding, unless our circumstances have changed. They have not. He stepped further into the chamber, closing the door quietly behind him. I have spent the afternoon in consultation with my solicitor regarding the matter of the children's identity. Marin felt her heart constrict. And what conclusion have you reached? That further evidence is required before any public declaration can be made. He moved to the hearth, warming his hands before the flames. Blood ties are not established by copper bracelets alone, no matter how compelling the circumstance. Relief and dread mingled in Marin's breast. What evidence do you seek? Records of the night in question. Testimonies from those who attended the Duchess in her final hours. His voice tightened imperceptibly. And an explanation as to how my heirs came to be abandoned upon your doorstep rather than stolen or... He broke off, unable or unwilling to voice the darker alternative. Marin's fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirts. And until such evidence is found, until then they remain in your care here at Eldermoor, where I may come to know them. He turned to face her, firelight casting his features in stark relief. And where you, Miss Larkwood, may come to trust that my intentions toward them are honorable. The candidness of his statement caught her unawares. I have never questioned your honor, Your Grace. Have you not? You speak of nobility viewing children as political pawns, of experience teaching women of your station to mistrust those of mine. There was no accusation in his tone, merely a quiet certainty. You feared I would separate you from them. Yes, she admitted, lifting her chin. I still do. Then we must address that fear. He moved toward her with deliberate steps. Tell me of them, Miss Larkwood. Tell me of the children I have lost 7 years with. The request, so simply stated, contained such profound longing that Marin felt her reserve begin to crack. She gestured to the chair opposite her own, resuming her seat as he took his. Sylvan is thoughtful, methodical, she began softly, taking up her needle once more to steady her nerves. He observes before he speaks, considers before he acts. His mind works like a finely crafted timepiece, each gear turning with precision. The Duke leaned forward, his attention absolute. And his temperament? Generally even, though he possesses a quiet stubbornness when his sense of justice is affronted. A smile touched her lips. He once refused to leave the village square until a carter apologized for striking his horse. He was but 5 years old, yet he stood his ground until the man relented. And Layla? Sunshine and storm in equal measure, Marin replied, her expression softening. Curious about all things, fearless in her pursuit of knowledge. She climbs trees to observe birds' nests, questions the blacksmith about the properties of metal, persuades the baker to explain the science of rising dough. She has your inquisitive spirit, the Duke observed. Marin's needle stilled. They are not of my blood, Your Grace, a fact I have never concealed from them. Blood is but one form of inheritance, he countered. You have shaped their characters as surely as any natural parent might. The unexpected acknowledgement brought heat to her cheeks. I have done what any decent person would. You undervalue yourself, Miss Larkwood. His voice had lowered, gained a warmth that caused her pulse to quicken. What you have given them, security, love, moral guidance, these are treasures beyond measure. Marin forced herself to continue her work, focusing on the careful placement of each stitch rather than the intensity of his regard. You speak as though you have already determined they are your heirs. My heart recognizes them, he admitted quietly, though my head counsels patience until all proof is gathered. And what of Lord Holden? Marin inquired, recalling the name mentioned earlier by the steward. He sought you regarding matters of succession. A shadow crossed the Duke's countenance. My cousin has served as steward of the Veriton estates during my absence. He has expectations regarding inheritance should my line end without issue. Expectations that would be dashed by the discovery of your heirs. Precisely. He steepled his fingers, his expression grave. Which is why discretion is paramount until all matters are settled beyond dispute. Holden is not a man to relinquish power willingly. Marin considered this new information with growing unease. Do you believe him dangerous? I believe him ambitious, the Duke replied carefully. And ambition, when thwarted, can breed desperation. A log shifted in the hearth, sending sparks dancing upward. In that momentary illumination, Marin glimpsed something vulnerable in the Duke's expression, a glimpse of the man beneath the title, worn by grief and solitude. What was she like? Marin asked softly. The Duchess? Surprise registered briefly in his eyes, followed by a shadow of old pain. Catherine was luminous, intelligent, compassionate, possessed of a quiet strength that complemented my more forceful nature. He paused, his gaze distant. She would have been a remarkable mother. I am sorry for your loss, Marin offered, the words inadequate yet sincere. As am I for yours, he replied, his attention returning to her. For if these children prove to be my heirs, you too stand to lose what you hold most dear. The truth of his words struck her with physical force, causing her breath to catch. What becomes of me then, Your Grace, when all is settled and proven? That, Miss Larkwood, he said, rising from his chair, is a matter I have contemplated greatly since our meeting this morning. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand upon the latch. Perhaps we may yet find a solution that serves all concerned. With that cryptic statement he departed, leaving Marin to stare after him, the ceremonial coat forgotten in her lap, as a new, unwelcome hope began to take root in her heart. Morning brought a temporary cessation of rain, weak sunlight filtering through lingering clouds to cast pale diamonds across the polished floors of Eldamore. Marin had risen with the dawn to complete her work on the Duke's coat, her fingers stiff from hours of meticulous stitching. The twins still slumbered, exhausted from their adventures of the previous day, exploring the castle's vast kitchens under the grudging supervision of Mrs. Reddenful. A soft knock heralded the arrival of a maidservant bearing a breakfast tray, and news that the Duke requested Marin's presence in the library once she had attended to her morning ablutions. The girl also delivered a dress of deep burgundy wool, simple in design, yet far finer than anything in Marin's own wardrobe. His Grace thought you might appreciate a change of attire, miss, the maid explained, laying the garment across the bed, on account of your own things still being at your residence. Marin touched the fabric with uncertain fingers. Please convey my thanks to His Grace, though the gesture was unnecessary. The maid curtsied and withdrew, leaving Marin to contemplate this unexpected courtesy. After a moment's hesitation, she donned the dress, finding it a perfect fit, a coincidence that both pleased and disquieted her. She roused the twins gently, assisting with their morning preparations before entrusting them to the maid's care with instructions to bring them to the library afterward. The castle corridors were bustling with activity as she made her way downstairs, servants hurrying to prepare for the evening's assembly. Marin clutched the ceremonial coat, freshly altered, as a shield against the curious glances cast her way. The library doors stood open, revealing a vast chamber lined with leather-bound volumes from floor to ceiling. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air like earthbound stars. The Duke stood before one such window, his back to the door, a book open in his hands. "Your Grace," Marin announced her presence with a soft voice and curtsy. He turned, his gaze lingering briefly upon the burgundy dress before meeting her eyes. "Miss Larkwood, I trust you found the accommodation satisfactory." "Quite, Your Grace. Thank you for your consideration." She extended the ceremonial coat. "The alterations are complete." He accepted the garment, examining her handiwork with an appreciative eye. "Excellent craftsmanship. You are as skilled as your reputation suggests." "You had inquired about my work previously. I make it a point to know the tradespeople within my domains," he replied smoothly, though something in his expression suggested this was not the entire truth. "Please, be seated." Marin lowered herself onto a leather armchair, her posture straight despite her fatigue. The Duke placed the coat aside and took the seat opposite her, his manner more formal than during their late-night conversation. "I have made inquiries regarding the night of the children's appearance at your door," he began without preamble. "The storm you mentioned coincides with the date of the Duchess's death and the disappearance of our heirs." Marin nodded slowly. "It was a terrible night. Thunder that shook the very foundations of Greywick. I would not have heard their cries had I not been awake, working on a commission that could not wait till morning." "Providence, perhaps," the Duke murmured. He leaned forward, his expression intent. "Miss Larkwood, I must ask you directly. Did you observe anyone that night? Any figure who might have left the children in your care?" "No," she replied truthfully. "I heard only the crying. When I opened my door, there was naught but the basket, the children within, and the rain." She hesitated before adding, "Though I did find a note." The Duke stiffened visibly. "A note? You made no mention of this yesterday." "It contained little information," Marin explained hastily. "Merely a request to care for the children, signed with an initial rather than a name. Do you still possess this note?" "Yes. It remains with my personal effects in Greywick. I shall send for it immediately." He rose, crossing to a bell pull and summoning a servant with a single tug. When the man appeared, the Duke issued brief instructions regarding the retrieval of items from Marin's residence. "Now," he continued once they were alone again, "there is the matter of Lord Holden's visit yesterday. He arrived to inform me that in my absence he has been managing affairs with an eye toward his eventual inheritance. He assumed the children were lost," Marin observed. "Indeed, an assumption he is reluctant to abandon, particularly upon hearing rumors of 2 children bearing a striking resemblance to the Veriton line." The Duke's expression hardened. "He has requested a formal investigation into your circumstances." Alarm flared in Marin's breast. "On what grounds?" "He suggests impropriety, that you may have been complicit in the events of that night, seeking to benefit from the children's status." "That is absurd," Marin exclaimed, indignation overcoming propriety. "I was a girl of 19 when they came to me, struggling to maintain my father's business after his passing. What possible advantage could I have sought? The eventual recognition of your wards as heirs to one of the wealthiest estates in the county," the Duke replied calmly, though his tone suggested he did not share his cousin's suspicions. "With yourself as their guardian controlling their inheritance until majority." Marin rose to her feet, trembling with suppressed emotion. "I have lived modestly these 7 years, Your Grace. We occupy 2 rooms above my shop. The children attend the village school. If wealth was my aim, I have demonstrated remarkable patience and poor planning." A hint of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "A logical observation, and one I made to Holden myself." "Then why pursue this investigation?" "Because Holden insists, and as matters stand, he has certain rights as presumptive heir." The Duke moved toward her, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his clothing. "But there are ways to circumvent his interference." "What ways?" Marin asked, suddenly aware of their proximity in a manner that sent blood rushing to her cheeks. The Duke regarded her steadily. "A legal arrangement that would protect both the children and yourself from his machinations, while investigations proceed at a more measured pace." Before he could elaborate, the library doors burst open, admitting the twins in a flurry of excited energy. They halted abruptly upon seeing the Duke, remembering the manners Marin had instilled in them. "Good morning, Your Grace," they chorused, executing the bows and curtsies they had practiced in their modest home for occasions that rarely materialized. The Duke's expression softened as he regarded them. "Good morning, Sylvan, Layla. I trust you slept well?" "The bed was enormous," Layla declared with characteristic frankness, "like sleeping upon a cloud." "The most accurate description," the Duke agreed, his tone warming. I have arranged for you both to join me on a tour of the castle grounds this morning. Would that be agreeable?" The children looked to Marin, seeking permission. She nodded, unable to deny them this opportunity despite her misgivings. "Excellent," the Duke pronounced. "Miss Larkwood shall accompany us, of course." His inclusion of her brought a flush of relief. "You are most kind, Your Grace." "Not kindness, Miss Larkwood," he replied quietly. "Recognition of your place in their lives." He turned his attention back to the children. "Before we depart, I have something for each of you." From his desk, he retrieved 2 small parcels wrapped in silver paper. A modest welcome to Eldamore. The children accepted the gifts with wide eyes, looking once more to Marin for permission to open them. At her nod, they carefully unwrapped the packages to reveal 2 books bound in tooled leather. For Sylvan, an illustrated volume on natural philosophy. For Layla, a collection of myths and legends with hand-colored plates. "These were favorites of mine at your age," the Duke explained, his voice carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "I thought perhaps you might enjoy them as well." The genuine delight that illuminated the children's faces pierced Marine's heart with bittersweet joy. They thanked him with the sincerity that was their nature, already turning pages with reverent fingers. Watching them, the Duke's expression held such naked longing that Marin was forced to look away, lest her own emotions betray her. This moment, the first gift from father to children, was one she had never anticipated witnessing. It represented both fulfillment and loss, the beginning of a bond that might ultimately exclude her. "Shall we proceed to the grounds?" the Duke suggested after allowing the children a moment with their treasures. "The gardeners have maintained the maze in excellent condition. It was a favorite amusement of mine as a boy." As they departed the library, Marin felt the weight of uncertainty press upon her shoulders once more. The Duke walked ahead with the children, already engaged in animated conversation. She followed at a discreet distance, observing the natural ease that had developed between them in so short a time. It was, she realized with painful clarity, precisely as it should be, and precisely what she had always feared. The gardens of Eldamore stretched before them like a verdant tapestry, autumnal hues beginning to touch the edges of the formal parterres. Mist clung to the lower terraces, lending an ethereal quality to the landscape, as the Duke led them along gravelled paths toward the hedge maze. The children walked on either side of him, their new books clutched protectively to their chests, faces upturned as he explained the history of the estate's gardens. Marin followed several paces behind, her thoughts as tangled as the yew hedges that rose before them. The Duke's mention of a legal arrangement had unsettled her deeply. What form might such an arrangement take? A formal guardianship that would bind her to Eldamore while investigations proceeded, or perhaps something more permanent? A position within the household that would allow her to remain near the children without the intimacy of maternal bonds? Her musings were interrupted by Layla's clear voice calling to her, "Mother, come quickly. His Grace says there's a fountain at the center of the maze with a statue that spouts water from its mouth." Marin quickened her pace to join them at the maze entrance, where the Duke stood with an expression that mingled amusement and something less definable as he regarded her. "The children are eager to attempt the maze," he explained. "Though I caution them, it is more challenging than it appears." "We shall conquer it nonetheless," Sylvan declared with the quiet confidence that characterized him. "Layla and I are accomplished puzzle solvers." "Indeed?" The Duke raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then perhaps a friendly wager is in order. You and your sister shall enter by the east path, while Miss Larkwood and I take the west. We shall see who reaches the central fountain first." The twins exchanged a glance of silent communication before nodding their agreement. The Duke turned to Marin, offering his arm with formal courtesy. "Shall we, Miss Larkwood?" She hesitated only momentarily before placing her gloved hand upon his sleeve. "The children are quite determined, Your Grace. I fear you may have underestimated their capabilities." "I suspect I have underestimated many things where they are concerned," he replied, as they watched the twins disappear into the maze with purposeful strides. He led Marin toward the western entrance, their pace unhurried. "And where you are concerned as well, perhaps." "I am but a simple seamstress, Your Grace. There is nothing simple about raising 2 children alone while maintaining a business," he countered, "particularly when those children may be heirs to a dukedom." They entered the maze, high walls of yew enveloping them in verdant shadow. The Duke navigated the turns with the ease of long familiarity, though he made no effort to hasten their progress. "You spoke earlier of a legal arrangement," Moraine ventured, when the silence between them had stretched too long. "May I inquire as to its nature?" He glanced down at her, his expression carefully neutral. "It would depend upon the outcome of our investigations, naturally. But I have considered several possibilities that might ensure the children's security while acknowledging your unique position." You are very considerate, Your Grace. Not consideration, Miss Larkwood. Pragmatism. He guided her around a sharp corner, his hand briefly covering hers where it rested upon his arm. The children clearly adore you. To separate them from the only mother they have known would be cruel, regardless of blood ties. A knot of tension within Marin's chest eased slightly at his words. Then you do not intend to remove them from my care. I intend to determine the truth of their parentage, he replied evenly. Beyond that, arrangements must be made that serve their best interests. Surely we can agree upon that principle. Of course. They walked in silence for several moments, the only sounds their footsteps upon the gravel and the distant call of birds from the surrounding woodland. The path narrowed, forcing Marin closer to the Duke's side, their shoulders nearly touching as they navigated a particularly tight passage. "Tell me, Miss Larkwood," he said suddenly, his voice pitched low, "have you never considered marriage in these 7 years?" The question caught her entirely unprepared. That is, there has been little opportunity for such considerations. No suitors from among the village merchants. The local gentry, perhaps. My circumstances precluded such attentions, she replied stiffly. A woman alone with 2 children of uncertain parentage is not considered a desirable match. More fools they, the Duke murmured. So quietly she wondered if she had misheard. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion ahead indicated they were approaching the center of the maze. Rounding a final corner, they emerged into a circular clearing dominated by a stone fountain where Neptune brandished his trident, water cascading from the mouths of dolphins that surrounded his feet. Beside the fountain stood the twins, their expressions triumphant. "We have been awaiting you these 5 minutes past, Your Grace," Sylvan announced with dignified satisfaction. "So I observe," the Duke acknowledged, his tone betraying genuine admiration. "You have indeed proven yourselves worthy opponents. We employed a systematic approach," Layla explained eagerly. Sylvan recalled reading that most mazes can be solved by maintaining constant contact with the leftmost wall. "A sound strategy," the Duke agreed, releasing Marin's hand to approach the children. "One that demonstrates both intelligence and practical application of knowledge." Marin watched as he engaged them in animated discussion of maze-solving techniques, their initial wariness toward him now replaced by enthusiastic participation. The scene before her, the Duke and the children conversing beside the fountain, sunlight dappling their figures through the gap in the hedges above, created a tableau of familial harmony that caused her throat to tighten with emotion. They belonged together. The truth of it was undeniable, written in the angle of Sylvan's brow, the shape of Layela's eyes, the unconscious gestures they shared with the man who stood before them. If they were indeed his heirs, and Marin's heart told her they must be, then her role in their lives would inevitably change. The question that remained was whether there would still be a place for her at all. A rustle in the hedge behind her interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she glimpsed a figure withdrawing hastily from view, a man in dark clothing whose face she had not seen clearly. The encounter, brief as it was, sent a chill of unease through her. "Your Grace," she called softly, moving to join the group at the fountain. "I believe we are observed." The Duke's expression sharpened instantly, his posture straightening as he placed himself between the children and the direction of her gaze. "Recently?" he inquired, his voice low enough that the twins, now distracted by the fountain's splashing waters, would not overhear. "Just now," Marin confirmed. "A man in dark attire. I did not see his face." The Duke's jaw tightened. "We shall return to the castle at once." He turned to the children with a smile that betrayed none of his concern. "I believe we have earned refreshments after our adventure. Mrs. Penbury, the cook, has prepared cherry tarts that I suspect you might enjoy." The promise of sweets was sufficient to divert the children from any questions about their sudden departure. The Duke led them from the maze by the most direct route, his hand occasionally coming to rest protectively upon Sylvan's shoulder or Layela's back. Marin followed close behind, the sense of being watched persisting until they reached the gravelled terrace that bordered the main house. As they ascended the steps to the terrace, Marin noticed a figure observing them from an upper window, a man with sharp features and an expression of cold calculation. He withdrew upon noticing her attention, but not before she had marked his appearance. "The man at the window," she murmured to the Duke as they entered the house. "Who is he?" "Lord Halden Veriton," the Duke replied grimly. "My cousin, and until yesterday, the presumptive heir to everything you see around you." Understanding dawned with chilling clarity. "The man in the maze may well have been in his employ," the Duke confirmed, "gathering evidence, perhaps, or merely observing our interactions." His expression hardened. "Either way, it appears our time for careful deliberation may be shorter than anticipated." He gestured to a passing footman. Escort Miss Larkwood and the children to the morning room for refreshments. I shall join you shortly." With that, he strode away toward the grand staircase, his bearing that of a man preparing for confrontation. Marin guided the children in the direction indicated by the footman, her mind racing with new fears. If Lord Holden viewed the twins as a threat to his inheritance, and the evidence suggested he did, then what measures might he take to discredit or remove them from consideration? And what role might she, their supposed mother, play in his schemes? The morning room of Eldermore presented a tranquil scene. Sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate cream-colored walls adorned with delicate pastoral paintings, a silver tea service gleaming upon a mahogany table, platters of cherry tarts, arranged with artful precision. Yet Marin could not shake the sense of foreboding that had settled upon her since their encounter in the maze. The twins, oblivious to adult concerns, partook of the refreshments with unconcealed delight, Layla exclaiming over the tartness of the cherries, while Sylvan methodically examined the flaky layers of pastry before taking his first bite. Marin smiled at their pleasure despite her unease, grateful for their resilience in the face of such dramatic changes to their circumstances. A commotion in the corridor drew her attention, raised voices approaching the morning room door, one unmistakably the Duke's, the other colder, more strident. "You overstep your bounds, Holden," the Duke declared as the door swung open, admitting him and a man Marin recognized as the figure from the window, tall and lean, with features that might have been handsome were they not arranged in an expression of perpetual disdain. "I merely seek to protect what is rightfully mine," Lord Holden replied, his gaze sweeping dismissively over Marin before fixing upon the children with calculated assessment. "What is rightfully Veritan, I should say?" The Duke's jaw tightened visibly. "Nothing is rightfully yours until established by law and lineage, a fact you seem increasingly eager to overlook." Holden offered a thin smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Speaking of law, cousin, I have taken the liberty of requesting the magistrate's presence tomorrow to investigate certain irregularities surrounding these children and their supposed caretaker." Marin rose from her seat, her spine stiffening with indignation. "If by irregularities you refer to my discovery of abandoned infants upon my doorstep, Lord Holden, I assure you, there is nothing irregular about an act of common decency." "Common indeed," Holden remarked, the double meaning unmistakable. "How fortunate for you that these particular abandoned infants bore such striking resemblance to the missing Veritan heirs." The Duke stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "You forget yourself, sir. Miss Larkwood is a guest in my home and deserves the courtesy accorded to her station." "Her station?" Holden laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "A village seamstress who appears from obscurity, claiming to have raised the Veritan heirs. Forgive me if I reserve judgment on what station she properly occupies." "I claim nothing, my lord," Marin interjected, conscious of the children's wide-eyed attention to the exchange. "I have raised Sylvan and Layla as my own, yes, but I have never proclaimed them to be anything other than children, entrusted to my care." "A convenient position," Holden observed, "one that allows you to adjust your story as circumstances dictate." He turned to the Duke. "You cannot seriously entertain this woman's tale without rigorous investigation. The implications for the duchy are too significant." "I entertain nothing without proper evidence," the Duke replied coldly, "which is precisely why I find your precipitous summons of the magistrate both presumptuous and inappropriate. This matter requires discretion, not the gossip such an investigation will inevitably generate." Holden's lips curved in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Discretion or secrecy, cousin? One wonders what aspects of this situation you wish to conceal from proper scrutiny." The Duke advanced a step, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre. "Choose your next words with care, Holden. Insinuations against my honor will not be tolerated, regardless of our blood ties." A tense silence followed, broken unexpectedly by Sylvan's clear voice. "Sir," he addressed Lord Holden with the direct gaze that was his nature, "if you believe we have caused you injury, I offer my apology. It was never our intention." Holden blinked, momentarily disarmed by the child's dignity. "The injury is not of your making, boy," he replied after a pause, his tone marginally less hostile, "though it may well be of your existence." "Our existence cannot be helped," Layla observed pragmatically, setting aside her half-eaten tart. "It simply is." A strangled sound that might have been laughter escaped the Duke. "Well reasoned, Miss Layla. Indeed, existence simply is. A philosophical truth Lord Holden would do well to accept." Holden's expression hardened once more. "Philosophy will not settle matters of succession, Kalen. Only bloodlines and legal declarations can do that." He inclined his head stiffly. I shall leave you to your family gathering. The magistrate arrives at noon tomorrow. I suggest Miss Larkwood prepare herself for thorough questioning." With that, he departed, the door closing firmly behind him. The Duke remained motionless for several heartbeats before turning to Marine, his expression grave. "I must apologize for my cousin's behavior. He has always possessed an unfortunate combination of ambition and entitlement." "There is no need for apology, Your Grace," Marin replied, though her heart raced at the prospect of a magistrate's inquiry. "Lord Holden's concerns, while unpleasantly expressed, are not entirely unreasonable from his perspective. You are generous to a fault, Miss Larkwood." The Duke's gaze softened as it moved to the children, who watched the adults with solemn attention. "I fear we have spoiled the enjoyment of your tarts." "Not entirely, Your Grace," Sylvan assured him earnestly. "They were most excellent." The Duke's lips curved in a brief smile before his expression turned serious once more. "Children, might I impose upon you to explore the book collection in the adjoining room for a few moments? I must speak privately with Miss Larkwood." The twins exchanged a glance of silent communication before nodding their agreement. Once they had withdrawn, the Duke moved to the window, his posture rigid with contained tension. "Holden's involvement of the magistrate accelerates matters beyond my preference," he began without preamble. "We must act decisively before his accusations gain traction." "What do you suggest, Your Grace?" Marin inquired, her fingers twisting anxiously in the folds of her borrowed gown. "The legal arrangement I mentioned earlier." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "A declaration of guardianship that would place the children under my protection, while acknowledging your continued role in their lives." Relief washed through Marin, though tempered by caution. "And this would prevent Lord Holden's interference?" "Not entirely, but it would strengthen our position considerably." He hesitated before adding, "However, there is another arrangement that would provide even greater security." "What arrangement might that be?" The Duke regarded her steadily. "Marriage, Miss Larkwood." Marin's breath caught in her throat. "Marriage to whom, Your Grace?" "To me." The world seemed to still around her, the Duke's words hanging in the air between them like smoke. I do not understand," she stammered at last. "It is a practical solution," he explained, his tone carefully neutral despite the gravity of his proposal. "As my wife, your care of the children becomes unassailable from a legal perspective. Lord Holden's insinuations would lose their foundation, and any claims of impropriety in your guardianship would be rendered moot." "You speak of marriage as though it were merely a legal contract," Marin observed, struggling to maintain her composure. "Is that not what marriage has always been among the nobility?" he countered. "An arrangement for the preservation of bloodlines and estates. This would differ only in its purpose, to protect the children rather than to produce them." The practical logic of his proposal was undeniable, yet Marin felt a curious hollowness at its core. "And what of affection, Your Grace? Of companionship and mutual regard? Are these considerations entirely absent from your calculation?" Something flickered in his eyes, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. "I hold you in the highest esteem, Miss Larkwood. Your devotion to the children, your integrity, your remarkable fortitude in circumstances that would have broken many, these qualities command my deepest respect." "Respect is not love," she replied softly, surprising herself with her boldness. "No," he agreed after a pause, "but it may be a more solid foundation for the arrangement I propose." Marin turned away, her thoughts in turmoil. "You ask me to enter a marriage of convenience, to become a duchess in name while remaining a seamstress in truth. I ask you to secure your place in the children's lives," he corrected gently. "And yes, to assume a title and responsibilities for which you have had no preparation. It is a great deal to ask, I acknowledge. And if I refuse, then we proceed with the guardianship declaration and weather whatever storm Holden raises." The Duke moved closer, though he did not touch her. "I do not offer marriage lightly, Miss Larkwood, nor do I wish to coerce you with fears for the children's welfare. The decision must be yours, made freely and with full understanding of its implications." Marin faced him once more, her chin lifting slightly. "I require time to consider, Your Grace." "Of course." He inclined his head respectfully. "Though I fear time is a luxury Holden's actions have now denied us. The magistrate arrives tomorrow and we must present a united front, whatever form that may take." "You shall have my answer by evening," Marin promised, her mind already racing with the enormity of the choice before her. "I ask no more than that." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand upon the latch. "The children may remain with their books for now. I suggest you take this opportunity for solitary reflection. The rose garden beyond the east terrace offers both beauty and privacy, should you desire it." With that he departed, leaving Marine alone with a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of not only her life, but those of the children she had raised from infancy. The rose garden lay dormant in autumn's embrace, the summer blooms long faded, though a few hardy specimens still offered their fragrance to the afternoon air. Marine walked slowly along the gravelled paths, her thoughts as tangled as the bare canes that would, come spring, burst once more into vibrant life. The Duke's proposal replayed in her mind with relentless clarity, practical, reasonable, and utterly devoid of the sentiments one might hope to inspire a marriage offer. Yet what had she expected? That a duke might declare passionate devotion to a village seamstress after a mere day's acquaintance? The notion was absurd, the stuff of fairy stories told to impressionable girls, tales in which humble maidens were transformed into princesses through the magical power of love. Reality offered no such transformations. The Duke sought a mother for his children, a shield against his cousin's machinations. That he had chosen marriage rather than a mere declaration of guardianship spoke to his sense of honor, perhaps, but not to any deeper attachment. Marine paused beside a stone bench, trailing her fingers over its cool surface before seating herself with a sigh. What choice did she truly have? To refuse meant potential separation from the children, subjecting them to the uncertainty of legal proceedings in which Lord Halden would undoubtedly employ every means at his disposal to discredit her. To accept meant security for Sylvan and Laela, continued presence in their lives, but at the cost of binding herself to a man who viewed their union as a mere convenience. A man who, despite his pragmatic proposal, had shown genuine tenderness toward the children. A man whose grief had shadowed his eyes when he spoke of his late wife. A man who, perhaps, was as unaccustomed to vulnerability as Marine herself. "Wool-gathering Miss Larkwood," the voice startled her from her reverie. She looked up to find Lord Halden standing at the path's edge, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the gravel. Marine rose immediately, instinctively putting distance between them. "Lord Halden, I did not hear your approach." "Few do," he remarked with a thin smile. "A useful quality in certain circumstances." He gestured toward the bench. "Please, do not stand on ceremony. I merely wish to speak with you privately, away from my cousin's watchful eye." Marine remained standing, her posture stiff with wariness. "I believe all that needs to be said between us was expressed in the morning room, my lord." "On the contrary," Halden moved closer, his manner falsely casual. "I believe we might find common ground, you and I, if given the opportunity to speak frankly." "Common ground?" Marine echoed skeptically. "I fail to see what interests we might share." "Security," he replied smoothly. "Financial security, to be precise. A concern I imagine is quite pressing for a woman in your position." Understanding dawned with chilling clarity. "You wish to bribe me, Lord Halden?" He winced theatrically at her bluntness. Such an ugly word for a mutually beneficial arrangement. "I prefer to think of it as compensation for clarifying certain matters regarding the children's origins." "There is nothing to clarify beyond what I have already stated," Marine replied, her voice steady despite the anger rising within her. "They were left in my care during the storm 7 years ago. I have raised them as my own ever since." Yes, so you claim." Halden waved a dismissive hand. "But surely there were inconsistencies in your story, details that might, upon reflection, cast doubt upon their identity as the Veritan heirs." Marine regarded him with undisguised contempt. "You ask me to lie, my lord, to perjure myself before a magistrate for your financial benefit." "For our mutual benefit," he corrected, unperturbed by her disdain. £5,000, Miss Larkwood, a sum that would establish you comfortably for life, far from Greywick and its limitations." The figure was staggering, more money than Marine would earn in 20 years of conscientious labor, yet the implication behind it struck her like a physical blow. "And the children?" she inquired, already knowing the answer. Halden shrugged elegantly. "They would remain at Eldermore, of course, as wards of the estate until their true parentage could be established, a process that might take years naturally, during which time you would control the Veriton properties and income as regent," Marine concluded, the scheme becoming transparent. "How convenient for you." A flash of irritation crossed his features before he mastered it. "I merely seek what is rightfully mine by expectation." Caelan abandoned his responsibilities for 7 years, leaving me to manage affairs in his absence. "And now he returns to supplant me with children of dubious origin. Children who bear the Veritan features so clearly that even you cannot deny the resemblance," Marine countered. "Children whose copper bracelets match those commissioned by the late Duchess." Halden's expression hardened. "Bracelets can be forged, resemblances can be coincidental, or manufactured through careful selection of suitable orphans. You suggest I orchestrated an elaborate deception 7 years ago in anticipation of the Duke's eventual return. Marin laughed incredulously. I was barely 19, my lord, struggling to maintain my father's business after his death. I possessed neither the foresight nor the resources for such a scheme. Perhaps not alone, Holden conceded, but with accomplices. The night of the Duchess's death remains shrouded in mystery. The children disappeared without trace, yet miraculously appeared upon your doorstep. One might reasonably conclude that you were part of a larger conspiracy. Fear threaded through Marin's indignation as she recognized the dangerous path Holden was constructing. That is absurd. Is it? He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Consider how it might appear to the magistrate, Miss Larkwood. A young woman of no family or connections suddenly acquires 2 children bearing a striking resemblance to the missing Veritan heirs. She raises them in obscurity until the Duke's return is announced, at which point she presents them as the lost children, a claim impossible to prove or disprove conclusively after so many years. Marin retreated a step, her back pressing against the cold stone of a garden statue. You twist innocence into suspicion, my lord. The truth is far simpler than your insinuations. Truth is malleable, my dear, Holden replied, his smile chilling, particularly when shaped by those with power and influence. The magistrate is a personal acquaintance, sympathetic to my position. His findings will reflect that sympathy, unless given reason to look favorably upon your circumstances. You threaten me with false accusations if I do not accept your bribe, Marin stated flatly. I offer you an opportunity to secure your future, Holden corrected. £5,000 and a clean departure from a situation that can only become more uncomfortable for you. Or you may choose to remain, facing scrutiny that will inevitably uncover inconsistencies in your narrative. Marin drew herself up, summoning dignity despite her racing heart. There is a third option you have overlooked, Lord Holden. And what might that be? That the truth will prevail despite your machinations. She stepped forward, forcing him to give ground. That the children will be recognized as the Duke's heirs through evidence you cannot falsify or suppress. That your greed will be exposed before all of society. Anger flashed across Holden's features, transforming them momentarily into something ugly and dangerous. You play a perilous game, Miss Larkwood, one in which you are severely outmatched. Not as outmatched as you believe, came a new voice, deep and commanding. Marin turned to find the Duke standing at the garden entrance, his expression thunderous as he strode toward them. Holden's posture stiffened, though he maintained an outward appearance of composure. Cousin, he acknowledged with a brittle smile, how fortuitous that you join us. Miss Larkwood and I were having a most illuminating conversation. I heard the substance of your illumination, the Duke replied coldly. Every word of it, in fact, from the moment you offered Miss Larkwood £5,000 to perjure herself. Holden blanched slightly but recovered quickly. A misunderstanding, nothing more. I merely sought to ascertain the lady's flexibility regarding certain facts. Your definition of misunderstanding appears as creative as your interpretation of honor, the Duke observed, positioning himself between Marin and his cousin. Allow me to clarify matters, that no further misunderstandings may occur. Miss Larkwood stands under my protection. Any action against her, legal, social, or otherwise, will be regarded as a direct affront to myself. How gallant, Holden remarked, sarcasm thinly veiling his fury. One wonders what inspires such chivalry toward a village seamstress. Perhaps more than the welfare of supposed heirs is at stake. The Duke's expression remained impassive, though Marin observed his hands clenching at his sides. What is at stake, Holden, is the integrity of the Veritan name, a concept with which you appear increasingly unfamiliar. The Veritan name, Holden echoed with a harsh laugh. How convenient that it suddenly matters to you after 7 years of abandoning your responsibilities to wallow in grief abroad. A dangerous stillness settled over the Duke. Choose your next words with exceeding care, cousin. Holden held his gaze for a tense moment before inclining his head in mock deference. I shall reserve my observations for tomorrow's interview with the magistrate. His gaze shifted to Marin, cold calculation evident in his expression. My offer remains open until dawn, Miss Larkwood. Consider it carefully. With that, he departed, his tall figure soon disappearing among the garden's autumnal remains. Marin released a breath she had not realized she was holding, her composed facade threatening to crumble now that the immediate threat had withdrawn. Are you harmed? The Duke inquired, his tone gentler as he turned to her. Only my pride, Marin replied, striving for lightness she did not feel. Though Lord Holden's insinuations were distressing, they were calculated to be so. The Duke's jaw tightened. I suspected he might approach you directly. Hence my suggestion of the rose garden where you might be observed from the library windows. Realization dawned. You used me as bait to reveal his intentions. I provided an opportunity for him to reveal his character, the Duke corrected, an opportunity he seized with predictable avarice. Marin was uncertain whether to feel anger at being manipulated or relief that Holden's true nature had been exposed so thoroughly. Before she could decide, the Duke continued. His threats cannot be dismissed lightly, however. The magistrate arrives tomorrow, and Holden will undoubtedly present his accusations with conviction. What defense have we against such calculated malice? Marin asked, the reality of their situation pressing upon her once more. The Duke regarded her steadily. Have you reached a decision regarding my proposal? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Marin had anticipated. She looked into the Duke's eyes, those remarkable grey-blue eyes that both Layla and Sylvan had inherited, and saw not merely calculation, but genuine concern. I have, she replied softly. I accept your offer of marriage, Your Grace. Dawn broke over Eldamore, pale light filtering through the leaded windows of the chapel where Marin stood in silent contemplation. The events of the previous evening had unfolded with dizzying rapidity following her acceptance of the Duke's proposal. A special license had been procured through connections that spoke to the Duke's influence. The castle chaplain had been summoned to perform the ceremony at first light, and now, mere hours later, she awaited the moment that would transform her from Miss Larkwood, humble seamstress, to Her Grace the Duchess of Eldamore. The gown she wore, ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, had been discovered in the castle's stores, hastily altered by her own hands to fit her slender frame. A garment intended for a different bride, perhaps, or commissioned for a ball never attended. The irony of a seamstress altering her own wedding gown in the dead of night was not lost on Marin as she smoothed the fabric with trembling fingers. The children had been informed of the impending ceremony, with a simplified explanation that emphasized their continued family unity rather than the practical motivations behind the union. Their reactions had been typically distinct. Sylvan solemn and thoughtful, asking pointed questions about how the marriage would affect their daily lives. Layla, immediately excited by the romantic notion, peppering Marin with questions about flowers and whether she might wear a crown. Footsteps behind her interrupted her musings. Marin turned to find Mrs. Redenfall approaching, her perpetual austerity somewhat softened by the occasion. The Duke awaits, miss, the housekeeper announced. The children are already seated with the witnesses. Thank you, Mrs. Redenfall. Marin gathered her courage, following the older woman toward the chapel's inner chamber where the ceremony would take place. The space was intimate, illuminated by candles and early morning light filtering through stained glass, depicting biblical scenes of marriage and family. Only a handful of attendees were present, the children seated in the front row, flanked by the Duke's secretary and steward as witnesses, with various senior servants standing respectfully at the rear, and at the altar, the Duke himself. He turned as she entered, and Marin was struck by the intensity of his gaze. He wore formal attire, the very coat she had altered upon her arrival, its midnight blue a striking contrast to his crisp white linen and the silver embroidery that caught the candlelight as he moved. He appeared every inch the aristocrat, a man of power and authority, worlds removed from her humble origins. Yet as she approached, something in his expression shifted, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips as though he had been momentarily rendered speechless. It was this unexpected vulnerability, rather than his ducal splendor, that steadied Marin's resolve as she took her place beside him. You are beautiful, he murmured, the words clearly meant for her alone. Thank you, Your Grace, she replied softly, uncertain how to interpret such a comment within their arrangement. Kaelin, he corrected, if we are to be husband and wife, you must use my given name. Before she could respond, the chaplain began the ceremony, his voice solemn as it echoed through the small chapel. The familiar words of the marriage service, heard before at village weddings but never imagined for herself, now took on new significance as Marin pledged herself to a man she had known for barely 2 days. When the moment came to exchange rings, the Duke produced a band of gold set with small sapphires, sliding it onto her finger with steady hands. With this ring I thee wed, he pronounced, his voice clear and unwavering. Marin had no ring to offer in return, a detail overlooked in the hasty arrangements, but the Duke seemed unconcerned by this omission, merely offering a reassuring smile as the chaplain continued the service. I now pronounce you man and wife, the chaplain declared at last. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride. Our kiss had not been discussed in their arrangement, and Marin felt a flutter of panic as the Duke turned toward her. His expression revealed similar uncertainty, but after a brief hesitation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a chaste gesture that maintained propriety while satisfying the ritual requirements. The witnesses applauded politely, and the children rushed forward, Layla flinging herself into Marin's arms, while Sylvan approached with more dignity to offer solemn congratulations to the Duke. The moment of family unity, however orchestrated, brought an unexpected lump to Marin's throat. "The papers have been prepared for signing, Your Grace," the secretary announced, gesturing toward a small table where the marriage certificate awaited. As they moved to complete this final formality, the chapel doors burst open with a resounding crash. Lord Holden strode in, accompanied by a portly man in judicial robes, whom Marin presumed to be the magistrate, and two constables in official attire. "I demand this farce cease immediately," Holden declared, his voice echoing through the sacred space. "This woman stands accused of conspiracy and fraud." The Duke straightened, placing himself between Marin and the intruders. "You are too late, Holden. The ceremony is complete. May I present Her Grace, the Duchess of Eldermoor?" The magistrate blinked in evident confusion. "Your Grace, I was led to believe, that is, Lord Holden indicated—" "I'm certain Lord Holden indicated many things," the Duke interrupted smoothly. "Most of them, I suspect, designed to further his own interests rather than the truth." Holden's face contorted with fury. "This changes nothing. Marriage to a criminal does not absolve her of past actions. I still demand an investigation into the children's origins and her role in their appearance." "Criminal?" the Duke echoed, his tone dangerously calm. "A serious accusation, cousin. One that requires substantial evidence, I believe. Perhaps the magistrate might enlighten us as to the specific charges." The magistrate shifted uncomfortably under the Duke's steady gaze. "Lord Holden has suggested irregularities in the children's guardianship, possible connection to the events surrounding the late Duchess's death and the disappearance of your heirs." "Irregularities," the Duke repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "And his evidence for these supposed irregularities?" "That remains to be determined through proper investigation," Holden interjected hastily, "which is why I've brought the magistrate to interview the woman, Duchess or not." The Duke's expression hardened. "You will refer to my wife by her proper title, Holden." "Your wife is a commoner you've known for barely 2 days, Holden sneered. "A hasty marriage that reeks of desperation and concealment." "Or perhaps," the Duke suggested, his voice deceptively mild, "it represents recognition of qualities you are incapable of appreciating. Honor, devotion, selfless love for children, not of her blood." Marin placed a restraining hand upon the Duke's arm, aware that Holden was deliberately provoking him. "Your Grace, Kalen," she amended, the name unfamiliar upon her tongue. "Perhaps we should allow the magistrate his questions. I have nothing to hide." "A wise suggestion, Your Grace," the magistrate approved, visibly relieved at the prospect of de-escalation. "Lord Holden, if you would withdraw while I conduct a private interview." "I shall not be dismissed," Holden began furiously. "You shall comply with the magistrate's request," the Duke interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Unless you wish to explain to the Lord Lieutenant why you disrupted a private religious ceremony with unfounded accusations." Holden's gaze darted between the Duke, Marin, and the magistrate, calculation evident in his expression. "Very well," he conceded at last, "but I caution you, cousin, that truth has a way of emerging despite efforts to suppress it. This charade of a marriage will not shield her from justice if she is indeed complicit in the events of that night." With that, he departed, though his baleful glance over his shoulder conveyed the battle was far from concluded. The Duke turned to Marin, his expression softening with concern. "You need not face this alone," he murmured. "As your husband, I have the right to remain present during questioning." "I know," Marin replied, touched by his protectiveness despite the practical nature of their union. "But perhaps it would be better to demonstrate complete transparency. I have nothing to fear from the truth." The Duke studied her face intently before nodding his assent. "As you wish. I shall await you in the library with the children." He turned to the magistrate with a warning in his eyes. "I trust you will conduct your interview with the respect due to the Duchess of Eldermoor." "Of course, Your Grace," the magistrate assured him hastily. As the others filed out, leaving Marin alone with the magistrate and one constable as witness, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. From seamstress to duchess in a single morning, a transformation more profound than any alteration she had ever undertaken with needle and thread. Whether this new garment of identity would prove comfortable remained to be seen, but for the children's sake, and perhaps in some small measure for the Duke's, she would wear it with all the dignity she could muster. "Now, Your Grace," the magistrate began, producing a notebook and pencil, Pray tell me all you recall of the night the children came into your care. The magistrate's questioning proved less intimidating than Marin had feared. Mr. Pembroke, as he introduced himself, was a methodical man who seemed more concerned with establishing facts than pursuing Lord Halden's vendetta. Marin recounted the night of the storm in careful detail, the thunder that had rattled her modest home's windows, the sudden cry that had drawn her to the door, the basket with its precious cargo sheltered beneath the narrow eaves. "And the note you mentioned," the magistrate prompted. "You say it was delivered with the children?" "Yes, sir. A simple message written on parchment and sealed with plain wax." Marin hesitated. "The Duke's men retrieved it from my residence yesterday, along with my personal effects. I should like to examine this note," the magistrate declared, making a notation in his book. Of course. The interview continued for nearly an hour, the magistrate's questions probing yet not accusatory. He inquired about Marin's circumstances at the time of the children's arrival, her subsequent care for them, any unusual occurrences or visitors who might have shown interest in the twins. Throughout, Marin answered with the straightforward honesty that had been her nature since childhood. "One final question, Your Grace," the magistrate said at last, setting down his pencil. "Why did you not come forward when proclamations were made regarding the missing Veriton heirs? Surely the copper bracelets must have raised suspicions about their identity." Marin clasped her hands in her lap, considering her response carefully. "By the time word reached our village, the children had already recovered from a dangerous fever that nearly claimed them. They called me Mother, looked to me for comfort and security." She met the magistrate's gaze directly. "I feared what might befall them if I presented them to a grieving duke who might see in them only painful reminders of his loss, or worse, to those who might view them merely as political pawns. So you kept them out of love rather than calculation?" "Yes, sir. Though I recognize now that my decision, however well-intentioned, denied His Grace 7 years with his children." Remorse colored her voice. "For that, I can only offer my deepest regret." The magistrate studied her thoughtfully. "Regret, yet not apology?" "An apology implies I would choose differently if faced with the same circumstances again," Marin replied honestly. "I cannot say with certainty that I would. The children's welfare has always been my primary concern." "A candid response," the magistrate observed, closing his notebook. "Refreshingly so." Their conversation concluded, Marin was escorted to the library, where the Duke awaited with the children. He rose immediately upon her entrance, his expression betraying the tension he had been concealing from the twins, who were engrossed in a game of chess at a small table by the window. "How fared your interview?" he inquired quietly as she approached. "Well enough, I believe," Marin replied. "The magistrate seems a fair-minded man, more interested in truth than Lord Halden's insinuations." "Pembroke is known for his integrity," the Duke agreed. Though Halden will undoubtedly attempt to influence his conclusions, before their conversation could continue, the library doors opened to admit the magistrate himself, followed by a servant carrying a small wooden box. "Your Grace," he addressed the Duke with a formal bow, "I have completed my preliminary inquiries and wish to present my findings." The children looked up from their game, sensing the gravity of the moment. Sylvan rose automatically, moving to stand beside Marin with a protective air that belied his 7 years. Layla followed, slipping her small hand into the Duke's with an instinctive trust that caused his expression to soften momentarily. "Proceed, Mr. Pembroke," the Duke instructed, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his bearing. The magistrate gestured to the servant, who placed the box upon the library table and withdrew. Among the items retrieved from the Duchess's former residence was this note, purportedly found with the children on the night of their abandonment. He removed a folded parchment, yellowed with age, its broken seal, a plain circle of red wax. "The message is brief but significant. If I may," at the Duke's nod, the magistrate read aloud, "Guard them well. They are of noble blood, but in mortal danger. Their mother's sacrifice must not be in vain. C.V." The Duke's face paled visibly. "Those initials correspond to your own, Your Grace. Caelan Veriton." The magistrate paused significantly, a fact which Lord Halden has seized upon to suggest the Duchess fabricated the children's abandonment with your knowledge. A scheme to present common-born infants as the Veriton heirs. "Preposterous," the Duke declared, though Marin noted the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he gazed at the note. "I was abroad when the Duchess met her fate, a fact well documented." "Indeed," the magistrate agreed, "which brings me to the second item of interest." He reached into the box once more, extracting a sealed letter bearing the crest of Veriton. This was found among the late Duchess's personal effects, apparently overlooked during the chaos following her death. "It is addressed to you, Your Grace." The Duke accepted the letter with visibly trembling hands. "Catherine's seal," he murmured, tracing the emblem with his fingertip. "Unbroken after all these years." "I thought it best you read its contents privately," the magistrate explained, "though I must request your permission to remain, as the letter may contain information pertinent to my investigation." The Duke nodded distractedly, his attention fixed upon the letter as he carefully broke the seal. Marin watched as he unfolded the parchment, his expression transforming from uncertainty to shock as he read the elegant script contained within. "Kaelin?" Marin ventured when the silence had stretched too long. "What does it say?" He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It is dated the very day of her death," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Catherine knew she was in danger. She suspected—" He broke off, glancing at the children before continuing more carefully. "She believed certain parties coveted the Veritan inheritance and would not hesitate to eliminate all obstacles to obtaining it, including the rightful heirs," the magistrate concluded grimly. "Yes." The Duke drew a steadying breath. "She writes that she entrusted the children to her most loyal lady's maid, with instructions to remove them from Eldermoor should anything befall their mother. The maid was to deliver them to a place of safety, far from those who might wish them harm." "The loyal servant being Miss Harlow, I presume," the magistrate interjected. "The Duchess's personal attendant, who disappeared the same night, presumed dead in the confusion." "Eliza Harlow, yes." The Duke's gaze returned to the letter. "Catherine indicates she provided the children's copper bracelets as proof of their identity, should the need ever arise to reclaim them." His voice softened. "She asks my forgiveness for acting without my knowledge, but feared any communication might be intercepted." Marin's heart ached for the Duchess's desperate measures to protect her children, and for the Duke, learning only now of his late wife's fears and final acts of maternal devotion. "There is one detail that remains unclear," the magistrate observed. "How did the children come to be left specifically at the Duchess's door? Miss Harlow would have had no prior connection to Greywick Village by all accounts. Unless," the Duke said slowly, a dawning realization in his expression, "she was following the Duchess's explicit instructions." He extended the letter toward Marin. "Read the final paragraph." Marin accepted the parchment with careful hands, finding the passage indicated, "Should fate separate us, my beloved, know that I have entrusted our precious ones to the care of Marin Larkwood in Greywick, daughter of Thomas Larkwood, who once saved my father from certain death during a hunting accident. Though she knows nothing of our connection, I have observed her from afar, and believe her to possess the character and fortitude necessary to raise our children should the worst befall us. Forgive me this secrecy, but I act only out of desperate love for them and for you." Marin stared at the words, a memory surfacing from the depths of her childhood. Her father returning late one evening, clothing sodden with another man's blood, speaking in hushed tones to her mother about an accident, a nobleman's gratitude, a promise of future consideration. "I never knew," she whispered, raising bewildered eyes to the Duke. "My father never spoke of saving a nobleman's life. The Earl of Montclair was Catherine's father," the Duke explained quietly. "The incident occurred when she was but a child. She never forgot the debt her family owed to yours." The magistrate cleared his throat. "This letter, combined with the Duchess's note and the copper bracelets, provides compelling evidence of the children's identity." He turned to Marin with new respect in his gaze. "It appears, Your Grace, that you were specifically chosen as the children's guardian, a sacred trust you have fulfilled admirably by all accounts." The realization washed over Marin like a wave. She had not been randomly selected by a desperate servant seeking shelter from the storm, but deliberately chosen by the Duchess herself as worthy of raising the Veritan heirs. The knowledge transformed her understanding of the past 7 years, casting her role not as accidental guardian, but as the fulfillment of a noble woman's final wish. "What becomes of Lord Halden's accusations?" the Duke inquired, his arm instinctively encircling Layla's shoulders as the child leaned against him. "They hold no water in light of this evidence," the magistrate declared firmly. "I shall inform him that my investigation has conclusively established the children's identity as the rightful Veritan heirs, and further, that the Duchess herself arranged for their safekeeping with the current Duchess, a remarkable providence that has ensured their welfare these 7 years." Relief flooded Marin's being, though it was tempered by the weight of the truth now revealed. She glanced down at Sylvan, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, his young brow furrowed in concentration as he absorbed the complicated adult matters unfolding around him. "Does this mean you are truly our father?" he asked the Duke suddenly, his direct gaze unflinching. The Duke knelt to meet the boy at eye level, his expression solemn. Yes, Sylvan, by blood and by law, I am your father. Though I have missed 7 years of your life, a loss I shall forever regret, I hope we may build our relationship anew from this day forward. Sylvan considered this with characteristic gravity, before nodding once. And, Mother, he glanced at Marin, uncertainty flickering across his features. The Duchess, she is still our mother. In every way that matters, the Duke assured him firmly. The woman who has loved and raised you these 7 years is now my wife and your mother by law as well as by devotion. Our family is united at last, as it always should have been. The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, brought tears to Marin's eyes. A family united, words she had never dared to dream might apply to her improvised household of 3. Yet here they stood, the truth revealed at last, bonds of blood and choice intertwining to create something new and precious. The magistrate bowed deeply. With your permission, Your Grace, I shall prepare my formal findings and inform Lord Holden of the outcome. Thank you, Mr. Pembroke, the Duke replied, rising to his full height once more. Your thoroughness and integrity are commendable. As the magistrate withdrew, the Duke turned to Marin, his expression reflecting a complex mixture of emotions, relief, gratitude, lingering sorrow for years lost, and perhaps, she dared to hope, the beginnings of something warmer. It seems, he said softly, that we have much to discuss, you and I. Evening descended upon Eldermoor, drawing a veil of indigo across the sky, as stars emerged like scattered diamonds above the ancient towers. Within the ducal apartments, transformed by the day's revelations from foreign territory to her new domain, Marin stood before the hearth in silent contemplation. The fire's glow caught the sapphires of her wedding ring, sending blue sparks dancing across her palm as she twisted the unfamiliar weight upon her finger. The events following the magistrate's departure had unfolded with bewildering rapidity. Lord Holden, confronted with irrefutable evidence of the children's identity and the Duchess's own written testimony, had departed Eldermoor in cold fury, his ambitions thwarted, but his malice undiminished. The Duke had immediately ordered increased security throughout the estate, unwilling to discount the possibility of desperate retaliation. The children, overwhelmed by the day's revelations, had been settled in their chambers with the promise of fuller explanations on the morrow. Marin had read to them from their new books until their eyelids grew heavy, maintaining the bedtime ritual that had anchored their lives in Greywick, despite the grandeur of their surroundings. Their resilience in the face of such dramatic changes to their understanding of the world both amazed and humbled her. Now alone in chambers that bore witness to generations of Vereton duchesses, Marin awaited the Duke, her husband, with mingled anticipation and trepidation. Their hasty marriage, arranged as protection against Lord Holden's machinations, now stood transformed by the Duchess's letter. No longer merely a pragmatic alliance, it had become something more complex, a fulfillment of Catherine's unspoken wishes, perhaps, that the woman chosen to raise her children might eventually stand beside her husband as well. The thought brought a flush to Marin's cheeks. What expectations might the Duke now harbour regarding their arrangement? The gentle kiss upon her forehead during the ceremony had suggested restraint, a respect for the practical nature of their union. Yet now, with the truth revealed, and their positions secured beyond challenge, would he desire a true marriage in all aspects? The soft click of the chamber door interrupted her musings. Marin turned to find the Duke entering quietly, still attired in the formal clothes of their wedding day, though his cravat had been loosened, lending him a more approachable air. "I trust the children are settled," he inquired, moving to pour 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Yes, though their minds were awhirl with questions I could scarcely answer," Marin replied, accepting the offered glass with murmured thanks. "They understand more than we credit, yet less than they believe. A condition not limited to childhood," the Duke observed with a wry smile, gesturing toward a pair of chairs arranged before the hearth. "Please, be seated. I believe we have much to discuss." Marin complied, arranging the folds of her gown, still the ivory silk of their wedding, having had no opportunity to change amid the day's tumult. The Duke took the chair opposite, his gaze resting upon her with an intensity that caused her pulse to quicken. "You must have questions," he began after a moment's silence, "about Catherine, about my absence these 7 years, about what shall become of us all now that the truth is known." "Many," Marin admitted, "though I scarcely know where to begin. Perhaps with gratitude," he suggested softly, "for your care of my children when I could not, for maintaining their safety when others sought their harm, for giving them love when I was absent." "You need not thank me for loving them," Marin replied honestly. "They made it impossible to do otherwise." The Duke's expression softened. Even so, I owe you a debt I can never fully repay, a debt Catherine recognized even before it was incurred, it seems. He glanced toward the letter, now resting upon a side table. Her foresight was remarkable. She saw in you qualities I have only begun to appreciate. Your wife must have been an extraordinary woman, Marin observed, a pang of something like jealousy surprising her with its intensity. She was, the Duke agreed, his gaze distant with memory. Though not infallible, her decision to conceal her fears from me, to act alone in protecting the children, while born of love, ultimately cost us 7 years of separation. He shook his head sadly. Had she confided in me, perhaps we might have faced the danger together. She sought to protect you as well as them, Marin suggested gently, a mother's instinct to shield those she loves from harm. Yes, the Duke's attention returned to her, his expression warming. A quality you share with her, it seems. Your first thought has always been for the children's welfare, even at cost to yourself. Marin lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with his praise. Any decent person would have done the same, would they? The Duke leaned forward, his voice lowering. To take in 2 abandoned infants when you yourself were barely beyond childhood? To raise them as your own, despite the whispers and suspicions that must have followed? To defend them against a Duke and his power when he appeared to claim them? He shook his head. No, Marin. Your actions transcend common decency. They speak of exceptional character, the very quality Catherine recognized when she entrusted her most precious treasures to your care. The use of her given name, spoken with such evident admiration, brought heat to Marin's cheeks. You are generous in your assessment, your Kaelin, she amended, the intimate address still unfamiliar upon her tongue. Not generous, merely observant. He paused, studying her with an intensity that caused her pulse to quicken. Which brings us to the matter of our marriage. Marin's heart fluttered beneath her ribs. Yes, it was contracted hastily, as protection against Holden's schemes. The Duke began carefully. A practical arrangement designed to secure your position and the children's welfare. I understood its purpose, Marin assured him, though a flicker of disappointment threatened at his clinical description. Its purpose, yes. The Duke set aside his untouched drink, rising to pace before the hearth. But circumstances have changed substantially since our vows were exchanged. The children's identity is established beyond question. Your role in their salvation is confirmed by Catherine's own hand. Our marriage, once a tactical necessity, now stands revealed as something providential. Marin's breath caught at the implication in his words. Providential. He turned to face her, firelight casting half his features in warm illumination, while the other remained in shadow. Catherine chose you to raise our children should misfortune befall her. By what design of fate do I now find you not merely their guardian, but my wife as well? He moved closer, his expression intent. It suggests a pattern beyond mere coincidence, does it not? Perhaps, Marin allowed, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs, though one might argue it was your proposal that set this pattern, not fate. My proposal, he echoed, a smile touching his lips. Born of pragmatism, yet leading to a union that fulfills my late wife's unspoken wish, that the children be raised by one who loves them as her own. He knelt suddenly before her chair, taking her hand in his. I begin to wonder if there might be more to our arrangement than mere convenience. Marin struggled to maintain her composure, acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hands enveloping hers, the intensity of his gaze. What are you suggesting, Kaelin? That we consider our marriage not merely as it began, a practical alliance, but as it might become. His thumb traced circles upon her palm, sending shivers of awareness through her entire being. A true union, founded initially in mutual concern for the children, but perhaps growing into something more substantial over time. More substantial, Marin echoed faintly. Companionship, he elaborated. Mutual regard, partnership in raising the children and managing the estate, and perhaps in time, he hesitated. A vulnerability in his expression she had not witnessed before. Perhaps affection might develop between us. The kind that transforms an arrangement into a marriage in truth. Marin's heart soared at his words, even as caution tempered her response. You speak of possibilities, not certainties. Life offers few certainties, he acknowledged. But I have observed you these past days. Your courage, your integrity, your unwavering devotion to the children. These qualities command my deepest respect. He paused, his gaze holding hers steadily. Respect upon which stronger sentiments might be built, given time and opportunity. And if such sentiments fail to develop? Marin asked, needing to understand the parameters of what he proposed. What becomes of us then? Then we remain as we are, Partners in raising the children bound by mutual respect, if not deeper attachment. His expression grew serious. I would not press unwelcome attentions upon you, Marin. Our marriage may have begun unconventionally, but I am determined it shall be honorable in all aspects. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. You are a good man, Calen Veritan, she said softly. Better than I dared hope when first we met. A smile touched his lips. And you are an extraordinary woman, Marin Larkwood, or Veritan, as I should now say, one I am privileged to call wife, whatever form our marriage ultimately takes. He rose then, releasing her hand with evident reluctance. I have arranged for adjoining chambers until we determine the nature of our relationship. My valet has been instructed to prepare the connecting rooms for my use. You shall have privacy and time to adjust to your new position. The consideration inherent in this arrangement, respect for her comfort, rather than insistence upon his rights as husband, confirmed Marin's growing estimation of his character. Thank you, she said simply, for your patience and understanding. It is the least you deserve. He moved toward the connecting door, pausing with his hand upon the latch. Rest well, Marin. Tomorrow begins our new life as a family, the four of us united at last, as Catherine would have wished. With that he departed, leaving Marin to contemplate the extraordinary turn her life had taken in mere days, from village seamstress to duchess, from solitary guardian to wife and mother, within a family united by both choice and providence. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth enveloping her like a promise. Outside, stars wheeled above Eldermoor's ancient towers, bearing witness to endings and beginnings, to secrets revealed and futures yet unwritten. Marin touched the sapphire ring upon her finger, no longer feeling it as a foreign weight, but as a symbol of possibility, of a life she had never imagined might be hers, but which now stretched before her with unexpected hope. Spring arrived at Eldermoor with gentle insistence, coaxing crocuses from the earth and tender buds from dormant branches. The rose garden, barren during Marin's first encounter with Lord Holden months before, now promised abundant blooms, as gardeners moved among the canes, pruning and tending with practiced care. From her position on the terrace, Marin observed the transformation with quiet pleasure, finding in nature's renewal a reflection of the changes within her own life. 6 months had passed since the revelations that had established the twins' identity beyond question and transformed a marriage of convenience into something far more meaningful. Lord Holden, his ambitions thwarted by the Duchess's letter, had retreated to his estate in the north, his influence diminished by the scandal of his attempted manipulation. The magistrate's findings, presented formally before the county's leading families, had vindicated Marin completely, while simultaneously confirming Sylvan's position as heir to the dukedom. The children had adapted to their new circumstances with remarkable resilience, though not without occasional difficulty. Sylvan, thoughtful and observant, had struggled initially with the weight of his newfound position, confiding to Marin one night that he feared disappointing the father he had only just discovered. Layla, by contrast, had embraced the grandeur of Eldermoor with characteristic enthusiasm, though she still preferred the simple pleasures of climbing trees and collecting insects to the refined pastimes expected of a lady of her station. Throughout these adjustments, the Duke, Calen, had demonstrated patience and understanding beyond Marin's expectations. He had engaged tutors for the children, but insisted they be allowed time for play and exploration. He had introduced them gradually to their future responsibilities, focusing first on developing their natural talents and interests, rather than imposing rigid expectations. Most importantly, he had respected the bond between Marin and the twins, never attempting to supplant her role, but rather seeking to complement it with his own developing relationship as father. And as for Marin herself, deep in contemplation, Duchess? Calen's voice interrupted her musings as he joined her on the terrace, the morning sunlight catching the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples. Merely appreciating the garden's transformation, she replied, offering a smile that came more naturally now than in the early days of their marriage, though I confess to some apprehension about this evening's gathering. The spring assembly? He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You need have no concerns. You have acquitted yourself admirably at every social occasion these past months, with considerable coaching and your constant support, Marin reminded him. Tonight marks my first formal presentation as hostess of Eldermoor. The county's leading families will attend with expectations formed by generations of Veritan duchesses, and they shall find the current duchess more than equal to her predecessors, Calen assured her, his hand covering hers where it rested upon the stone balustrade. Your natural dignity needs no aristocratic lineage to command respect. The casual touch, once a source of nervous awareness, now brought comfort and a flutter of deeper emotion. Their relationship had evolved gradually over the months, progressing from formal politeness to genuine companionship, from separate chambers to shared moments that grew increasingly intimate. The adjoining rooms remained, but the connecting doors stood open more often than closed these days. "You are biased in your assessment," Marin teased gently, turning her palm to entwine her fingers with his. "Proudly so," he acknowledged, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss against her knuckles. "Though I am merely the most vocal among your admirers. The servants adore you, the tenants respect you, and the children, well, they have always loved you best. As I have loved them," Marin replied softly, "though my heart has expanded in unexpected ways since coming to Eldermore." The admission, offered without calculation, brought a warmth to Kaylin's gaze that caused her pulse to quicken. "Has it indeed? I should be most interested to hear in what ways, Duchess." Before Marin could respond, the sound of childish laughter drew their attention to the lower garden, where Sylvan and Layla raced along the gravel paths, their formal lessons evidently concluded for the morning. Layla clutched something in her hands, holding it high as Sylvan pursued her with determined strides. "It appears your son has lost possession of some treasure," Marin observed, smiling at the familiar scene. "My son?" Kaylin raised an eyebrow. "I note he becomes exclusively mine when mischief is afoot." "A duchess's prerogative," she replied with mock solemnity. He laughed, the sound warming her more thoroughly than the spring sunshine. "One of many you have claimed since assuming the title." His expression softened as he gazed at her. "Though none so precious to me as your gradual claim upon my heart." The quiet declaration, delivered without dramatic gesture yet profound in its simplicity, stilled the breath in Marin's lungs. They had grown closer these past months, yes, had shared confidences, concerns, moments of both levity and solemnity. Physical affection had developed between them as naturally as the spring buds unfurling on the garden's trees. Yet neither had spoken directly of love, as though the word itself possessed a power they had not been ready to invoke. "Kaylin," she began, uncertain how to respond to this first acknowledgement of deeper feelings. "You need not say anything," he assured her quickly. "I speak only of my own heart, not to place expectations upon yours. Our beginning was unconventional enough, without pressing for sentiments that may require more time to develop." Marin studied him in the clear morning light, this man who had entered her life as an imposing figure of authority and potential threat, yet who now stood beside her as partner, protector, and increasingly beloved companion. The changes in him were subtle but profound. The grief that had shadowed his eyes now replaced by quiet contentment, the formal reserve that had characterized their early interactions now softened by genuine warmth and occasional playfulness. "Time has already worked its influence," she replied at last, her voice gentle with affection. "What began as duty has become something I treasure beyond expression." The naked hope that transformed his features at her words caused Marine's heart to swell with tenderness. He moved closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek with exquisite care. "May I kiss you, Duchess? Not as ceremony demands, but as my heart desires." "Yes," she whispered, a single syllable barely audible above the morning breeze. His lips met hers with reverent gentleness, a kiss that spoke of admiration transformed to affection, of respect deepened to devotion. Marin responded with growing confidence, her hands coming to rest upon his shoulders as the embrace lengthened, sweetened, became an eloquent declaration without words. When they parted at last, Kaylin rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I had not expected this when I proposed our arrangement," he confessed quietly, "that the woman who saved my children would ultimately save me as well." "Saved you?" Marin echoed, her fingers smoothing the fabric of his coat with unconscious tenderness. "From what, precisely?" "From a half-life," he replied simply. "From existing without truly living. From duty without joy." He drew back slightly to meet her gaze, his own filled with quiet wonder. "You restored my children to me, yes, but you have given me far more than that, Marin. You have given me a family, a home in the truest sense, a reason to look forward rather than backward." The depth of emotion in his voice brought tears to Marin's eyes. "As you have given me a place where I truly belong," she replied softly. "Not merely a title or position, but a purpose beyond my own small existence." A shout from the garden below interrupted their moment of intimacy. They turned to see Sylvan triumphantly reclaiming whatever treasure Layla had purloined, his expression shifting from satisfaction to alarm as his sister tackled him with unexpected ferocity, sending both children tumbling onto the spring grass in a tangle of limbs and indignant exclamations. "Perhaps we should intervene," Marin suggested, though amusement colored her voice. Perhaps, Kaelin agreed, making no immediate move to do so, though they appear evenly matched despite the difference in their approaches. They watched as the childish battle resolved itself, Sylvan helping Layla to her feet with the innate chivalry that characterized him, Layla accepting the gesture, with a grace that belied her previous ferociousness. The object of their dispute, apparently a particularly interesting beetle, was examined jointly before being carefully released into a nearby flower bed. "They are remarkable children," Kaelin observed, pride evident in his voice. "A credit to your raising, and increasingly to your influence," Marin added, noting how Sylvan's posture had begun to mirror his father's over recent months, how Layla now tempered her exuberance with occasional flashes of the dignity she observed in the Duke. "We make a formidable partnership, it seems," Kaelin remarked, his arm encircling her waist with casual intimacy. "In parenting as in other aspects of life." Marin leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him, the security she had found within the circle of his arms. "Indeed we do, Your Grace." He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice lowering to a whisper meant for her alone. "I love you, Marin Veritan, not for duty's sake, nor for the children's, but for your own. For the heart that beats beneath the title, for the courage that outshines any bloodline, for the love you have given so generously to those in your care." The declaration, simple yet profound, filled Marin with a joy so intense it bordered on pain. "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling both new and inevitable upon her tongue. "Not for your title or position, but for the man who stands behind them, for your integrity, your patience, your capacity for growth and change." Their lips met once more, sealing the declaration with a kiss that spoke of promises kept and journeys shared. Below them, the children had spotted their parents on the terrace and were waving enthusiastically, their morning disagreement already forgotten in the resilient manner of youth. Marin waved back, her heart full as she gazed at the family she had never dared to imagine might be hers, a family formed not merely of blood, but of choice, of circumstance transformed by love, of separate paths converged into a single journey, from humble seamstress to duchess, from solitary guardian to beloved wife and mother. Her transformation had been profound. Yet the essence of who she was remained unchanged. A woman who had opened her heart and home to abandoned children, who had raised them with love and dignity despite humble circumstances, who had found in their care a purpose that transcended her own limited expectations. The spring breeze carried the scent of new blooms across the terrace, a promise of seasons yet to unfold, of growth yet to come. Marin breathed deeply, savoring the moment as Kaelin's arm tightened around her waist, as the children called for them to join their exploration of the awakening garden. This was her life now. Not a dream or fairy tale, but a reality woven from threads of courage, sacrifice, and unexpected grace. A reality in which a young seamstress had indeed raised twin orphans in silence, until the Duke returned claiming them as his heirs, and in doing so had claimed her heart as well. In this tale of love and sacrifice, we discover the profound truth that family is not merely defined by blood, but forged through the sacred bonds of devotion and choice. Marin's journey reminds us that true nobility resides not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to love selflessly, to protect fiercely, and to persevere through life's darkest storms. The seamstress who mended garments also wove together the torn fragments of a broken family, demonstrating that our humble acts of love can create legacies far greater than we might imagine. When we choose to open our hearts and homes to those in need, we may find ourselves transformed in ways we never anticipated, elevated not by circumstance but by the dignity of our own compassion. The Duke's evolution teaches us that pride must sometimes yield to humility, that the willingness to see beyond appearances reveals treasures of character we might otherwise overlook. In recognizing Marin's worth, he discovers that true partnership transcends social boundaries, finding in her simple integrity a nobility that no title could bestow. Perhaps most powerfully, this story reminds us that Providence often works in patterns we cannot discern until we look backward from a place of understanding. What seems like chance, two orphaned children left at a humble door, may in fact be the first stitch in a tapestry of redemption and love that continues to unfold throughout our lives. May we all find the courage to be like Marin, to love when it's difficult, to persevere when the path is unclear, and to recognize that sometimes the family we're meant to have is the one we choose to build, one selfless act at a time. Dear listeners, if this tale of love, sacrifice, and unexpected grace has touched your heart, we invite you to share in our storytelling journey. Subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss our weekly Victorian romances, each crafted to transport you to a world where honor still matters, where love conquers social boundaries, and where courage transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary legacies. Leave a comment sharing which moment in Marin and Kaylin's story resonated most deeply with you. Was it her selfless decision to raise the orphan twins, the Duke's growing recognition of her true worth, or perhaps the revelation that brought their family full circle? Your thoughts inspire our future stories and connect us as a community of romance enthusiasts. And if you know someone whose heart would be warmed by this tale of redemption and love, please share it with them. For in stories, as in life, the most precious gifts are those we give freely to others. With heartfelt gratitude from all of us at Victorian Romance Audio Stories, we thank you for joining us on this journey through the twists of fate that transformed a humble seamstress into a duchess, not by magic, but by the enduring power of love.